Now, before we begin this episode again, let me just orient us gently. This is not a space for judgment or for moral conclusions. This is a space where we want to translate conflict back into honesty and connection, especially when pain has made everything harder to name. Now, this story doesn't start with loss. This story starts with momentum. So, a man who has spent years feeling like he's been behind finally finds his footing in life. He changes his body, he works out, he builds friendships, and he finds work that actually affirms him. And he even earns a doctorate as well too. And then he proposes, and for the first time, he feels fully seen by the people who raised him. But then 2 weeks later, his parents passed away tragically in a car accident. It was a sudden accident. There was no preparation. There was no slow goodbye. And in the immediate aftermath, he just kind of functions and he organizes and he delegates and he moves. And then he leaves. He goes alone into the mountains, not to escape, but to try and understand and to dissolve himself enough that the pain might somehow make sense. But what he comes back with is not clarity, though. He comes back more fractured. He tells his partner, his fiancée, what he did. And while he was in the mountains, he took some substances, a whole combination of them together. And the intention here was to try and erase the self that now hurts too much to carry the pain. And then something else shifts after this too. And it's not just the grief, but it's also his orientation that he'd found before. See, the man who returned wasn't now moving through a season of mourning. He kind of felt stalled on the inside, right? And he paused that morning, and months began to pass by, and his body changes back again, and his joy just evaporates, and his worldview collapses into nothingness. Therapy by both of them is attempted more than once, like couples therapy, individual therapy, grief support as well was thrown in there. But none of this lands for him, because somewhere along the way, help stopped being welcome to him, and certainty replaced curiosity. And he started saying a lot more like, I know better, right? And then slowly the relationship begins to starve and go through a drought season. Not all at once, but quietly. The intimacy and the sex disappear. Attunement fades. She loses her job, and that goes unnoticed by him. Her parents visit, but that becomes unbearable for him because it reminds him of what he no longer has, right? But she, to be supportive, keeps showing up. She shows up with patience. She shows up with understanding. She shows up sacrificially as well. Until something else appears in that connection, and that is not necessarily anger, but numbness, and even aversion. And that's the part that she's most ashamed to name, right? See, what's really happening here isn't cruelty or abandonment. It's relational exhaustion after this prolonged exposure to unprocessed grief. Not, why can't you just move on, but more so, how long can one person live inside another person's collapse? So this is where integrity becomes unavoidable. See, integrity is about alignment, right? Alignment between what we know internally and what we continue to sustain externally. And here, something true has emerged that no longer matches the life that was being lived. or that is being lived. She knows that she is depleted. She knows that she is carrying far more than what is being shared by both of them. She knows that the relationship is asking her to disappear in order for her to survive. But honoring that truth, it feels kind of disloyal. It feels cruel. It feels unloving. And so integrity kind of stalls. Not because she lacks compassion, but more so because acknowledging her limits feels like betrayal of his pain. So that's how integrity fractures under grief. But now let's also let's look at intimacy as well here. See, intimacy requires mutual presence. Not constant joy, but responsiveness. And here intimacy kind of thins, not because he is hurting, but because his pain has become complete and total. There's no room left for her inner world. There's no space for reciprocity. There's no shared horizon anymore. And closeness now turns into caretaking. And partnership becomes containment. And intimacy can't survive when one person is being asked to witness without being witnessed in return. This is where I think many people get confused, because grief is real, and compassion does matter, yes. But intimacy doesn't really mean endless self-erasure, right? See, most of us, I think, can maybe recognize some version of this in our experience, perhaps. Maybe we stayed longer than our capacity allowed, or maybe we confused endurance with devotion. Perhaps we believed that love means absorbing everything without any limits. But if we're honest, maybe some of us have also been on the other side as well too. And so we might have been so consumed by our own pain that we couldn't see what it was costing the people who stayed by us. See, I've been close to that edge myself too. There were moments where grief narrowed my vision, where survival replaced connection, and where I didn't really mean to disappear, but I did. Now, just to remind you again, like in this series, this is not about finding villains in our story. It's a story about what happens when grief stops being something that someone kind of moves through and becomes the place where they choose to camp out and live. So let's name the unspoken rule that's operating underneath our story today, shall we? And I think that would probably say something like, if I'm grieving deeply enough, then the relation must pause indefinitely. See, that rule was never really agreed upon in our story, but it kind of governed everything circumstantially through it, didn't it? And when this pattern goes unexamined, the cost here is one's selfhood. Partners begin to vanish inside compassion, and love kind of turns into this obligation, and resentment grows where care once lived. And relationships don't usually end because someone is grieving. Relationships end because the grief becomes the only identity that's left, and there's no room for anything else. So, as you sit with this, maybe notice this question, if you would. Where in your life are you staying past your capacity because leaving feels like a moral failure? Now, let me remind you, I'm not really looking for an answer right now, just asking for you to notice what moves as you think through that question. Some of you may want to like engage with me though too, and if you do, I want you to keep it reflective. And if you do share, would you be open to sharing with me where you recognize yourself in our story today? And what kind of language did this finally give you to be able to express what you couldn't before? Because this is a space not for verdicts, but for us to hold a mirror up to ourselves. So think through this with me if you would. Thanks for engaging with me. I'll see you in tomorrow's episode.